Now, it's also possible for people to be interested in leadership, but not sure, actually, what to do about it. So there would be people at times having to kind of define themselves in leadership and in roles that are unfamiliar to them and so on. So in this sense, many people would be not ready for leadership yet because they're still figuring out a bunch of things like that. But they might nonetheless someday provide leadership. A good example of this, many people wouldn't remember her, but there was a woman by the name of Rosa Parks. She was the very famous woman in the civil rights days who said she's not going to give up her seat on the bus, to white people. And everybody thought, oh, what a courageous woman, Rosa Parks and so on. And she was, because it was an orchestrated moment. It wasn't, it was all choreographed. It was not, oh, you just had one of those days where you just want to revolutionize the world, In fact, she had studied for that day for a very long time. Her real interest was education for young black children. She was a black woman interested in education, and she went along to a civil rights think tank called the Highlander Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, and this would be, most people would know about it, but it was one of the think tanks for the civil rights movement, and it was one of those places where black leaders and white leaders came together and formed a common set of leadership connections. So it allowed the black civil rights movement to link up with progressives in the white sort of community in America at the time. And in those days, America was very divided, black and white, so trusting across the race line was much harder, but people did. And Rosa Parks came along to those sessions at the center, but didn't really have no interest in doing the bus thing. And in fact, they had another woman in mind for the not give up her seat on the bus moment. Which of course was symbolic. It was an attempt to, just like they had sit-ins at restaurants and things, this was kind of a trying to break the race line. And but the woman had a kind of checkered past, so they thought the leaders that were going to use this tactically said, well, we can't use her because if she gets a lot of press notice, they're going to dig up all this stuff on her, and then our heroine won't be quite the heroine because she's got these shortcomings in her past. Whereas Rosa Parks, one of her great qualities is that she was a very modest woman who had done nothing reckless with herself in her life. She had no dark past to hide. She was perfect, So they talked her into it, and she wouldn't give up her seat on the bus, and it was all sort of choreographed. And that's where she came from. And then she became this sort of famous person who didn't really want to be famous. She's hated being the famous. But she was now the great Rosa Parks, which is a legend she didn't want and didn't deserve as far as she was concerned, and never liked playing that role. She just thought it was phony. All I did was give up my seat because they twisted my arm to make me do it. And yet here she's become a kind of legend. When you humanize leadership, then you begin to see it as human beings trying to provide leadership under all kinds of circumstances. And people might provide leadership not because they want to provide leadership, but because there's no other choice. So in this sense, necessity defines leadership, not an interest in leadership. So many leaders provide leadership because they've tried every other thing and nothing worked. So all they've got left is leadership. And so many leaders are, the last thing they want to do is provide leadership. But they do it. And so leadership is driven by necessities, needs and necessities. And if there's enough need, enough necessity, people will do something about things. But there may be needs and necessities for which nobody's providing leadership on. So it's quite possible. Some people say, well, necessity is the mother of invention. But it's really not the guarantor of invention. So even though leadership is deeply needed, doesn't mean you will get it. So there'd be all kinds of times in history when leadership is very scarce. You cannot find any, even though there's lots of needs that people have. So in this sense, leadership can be generated at any point, but there would be points in which it's discouraging to try to provide leadership, and so you might find very few incentives for people to step forward and tackle things. Particularly, for instance, when you're, as they say, when you're a voice in the wilderness, when you're one of a handful of people, who wants to take on that? You'd rather wait till everybody arrives at the party and we can all do it together.